What's the date today, everybody? Somebody remind me, because I'm so far out of the loop. Okay, according to my diary today, it's Tuesday the 9th? No, Tuesday the 19th? Anyway, whatever date it is, doesn't matter. Here we are. Now, you haven't seen me for a while, and again, apologies for not being online more frequently. Also, slight apologies for the state of the photography today. I've got an awful lot of both shade and light, so my camera's having a bit of a struggle. But anyway, I thought I would make a program today about a couple of things, and actually just looking at my notes here about what's been going on, there really are only three things going on politically at the moment, which I think are worth commenting about. The first one is Nigel Farage. Now, it's impossible to avoid Nigel Farage, especially if you watch the BBC, because as you know, the BBC is effectively the PR department of Nigel Farage's new UKIP. Now remember, UKIP was developed by Farage before 2016, and the BBC was actually, I think, the first television company to actually platform the man in 2014, 2015, when he was talking about the idea of voting to leave the European Union. Now, at that time, he was probably the only guy that I could see possibly publicly who was saying this out loud. And yet the BBC gave him a platform. And before you know it, they have basically been responsible for the rise of Nigel Farage to prominence. So in the last nearly 10 years, they've been effectively assisting Farage, assisting him in his goal of separating the United Kingdom from the rest of Europe. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, yes, it is a bad thing. And it's a bad thing because it is probably the worst, most embarrassing and stupidest suicide, and I'm talking about international trade here, of any nation ever on the planet. Because the United Kingdom, as a tiny wee country with a former massive colonial legacy, has nothing left really to be independent with, except, interestingly, us, Scotland, who are providing the vast, and I'm quoting here from a Labour Party document, vast natural resources in terms of renewable energy, which of course the Labour Party wants to funnel down to England as quickly as possible. Anyway, that's a story for another time. But let's talk about Farage for a minute. What is he saying now? Well, his latest rant is that his Reform Party is now the second party in the United Kingdom, overtaking the Tories. He's expecting his Reform Party to replace the Tories as the party of opposition. And he's then going on to claim that although he thinks he's not going to make it in terms of forming a government this time around, and let's face it, nobody really wants that, he's now expecting that he'll become the leader of the official opposition when Labour is elected in the next few weeks. Now that's a great big assumption, and that assumes, of course, that the die-hard Tory voters who haven't shifted to Reform are still going to stick with the existing Tory party and split the vote. But if Farage is right and he does become the leader of the opposition, his next ambition is to become the Prime Minister in the next general election after this one. So we're talking about 2031. Wow, we can imagine Farage as a Prime Minister. And this is a man who is known to be racist. He is known to hate foreigners, despite being married to one for some bizarre reason. I don't know how that works. And a man who has no grasp at all of the bigger international trading picture that the United Kingdom is sort of fitting into at the moment. Now, I also want you to imagine something. Imagine if Farage does get his wet dream, if it comes true, and he becomes the Prime Minister in 2031, let's say. Imagine if Trump also gets elected. Can you imagine a Trump-Farage axis? An axis of stupidity. Two men with fantastically large egos and really not enough international and commercial news to know what you should do when you're running a country. For example, Trump sees everything as a transaction. He sees everything as a business deal. He's not a politician. He claims to be a businessman, although he inherited his wealth, bought a lot of hotels, and nobody has really seen any massive success coming from anything that Trump owns. We only have to look at these golf courses in Scotland to realise that he's not the great magician he makes out to be. However, he's fantastically popular with the far right in the United States because, again, he is, shall we say, covertly racist. He's a little bit more subtle than Mr. Farage, but at the same time, he shares a lot of the traits. So I'm just trying to imagine a Farage and Trump kind of double act. This is probably the most horrifying thing I can imagine for world global peace, because apart from anything else, Donald Trump has already said he's quite happy to sell out the Ukrainians to Russia to end the war. He's happy to throw millions of people to the dogs just to basically please his own voters. Farage, on the other hand, well, where does he go from here? He's already achieved his long-term ambition to separate the United Kingdom from 27 other trading countries with which we did a lot of business. And because of the Brexit that he proposed back in 2015, we've now lost something like £40 billion worth of export revenues. So the country's on its uppers, and whoever inherits the poison chalice of the British Premiership, and I assume it's going to be Sir Keir Starmer, he's really going to be basically juggling with hand grenades while sliding around on banana skins trying to do something with the UK economy. And remember, the UK economy is not based on anything tangible other than service industries. It has very little manufacturing left and almost no real infrastructure investment at all. For example, the sewerage system in London at the moment is so bad that it is expected that London is joining the 9 most likely cities in the world to run out of clean drinking water by the end of the decade. Now that includes an awful lot of third world countries, developing countries, South American countries like Mexico, Venezuela, places like that. London is expected to run out of clean drinking water because Thames Water took the money it got from the government when it got the privatisation of the water companies and did absolutely nothing with it. And so sewage is now pouring into the River Thames, it's pouring into rivers and lakes and seas all across England, and there's not going to be any clean drinking water left. So the whole of the British experiment in being independent from Europe has landed them in a situation where the people in the capital city of the UK are being forced to drink sewage-laced drinking water and run out of drinking water because the privatisation was basically, the money from that privatisation was spent not on the sewers and not on improving the quality of the water, but on basically feeding shareholders' pockets, which is exactly what the Tories wanted. So Britain is going to be pretty crap, if you'll pardon the expression, so I suppose that's a double entendre there, but Britain is going to be pretty crap. And unfortunately, Scotland's the only place in the United Kingdom which is doing well. In fact, an economist last week was saying that Scotland is the only part of the United Kingdom which is doing better than any other part of the United Kingdom except London and the South East. Scotland's economy is pretty good. Why is it pretty good? Well, probably because the people in Scotland get on with generating new work and exporting and importing, despite all the hurdles placed in front of them by people like Nigel Farage. But then we get back to this problem of being trapped in the United Kingdom, which, as we know from Labour, will not have enough energy for the southern counties of England. Labour's now proposing that we connect up as many of Scotland's wind farms and tidal energy arrays and whatever other renewable resources we have so that the south of England can get some cheap electricity, because they haven't invested in their own renewable energy, because guess what? All that money probably went into the pockets of shareholders as well, instead of into investing in the kind of wind energy which we have. So it's pretty bad, really. I wanted not just to have a shot at Farage and Trump today, although they're tempting targets, but I also wanted to say something about John Swinney, who I noticed in some posts today on the internet has been promising all kinds of stuff if voters will vote for the SNP. Protecting all sorts of things, giving all sorts of funding to different groups and protecting vulnerable people and all the rest of it. He's making an awful lot of promises which, even according to my arch enemy, I'm talking here about Lord Fowkes here, who spouted this earlier on today, Fowkes actually pointed out something which is true, that Swinney can't actually action any of these pledges, because even if he has a brilliant day and we get all 57 seats going to the SNP, there's no way that John Swinney can make the British government do any of the things that he's pledged, which is true. So it begs the question, why is he promising stuff like this if it's not feasible in a British election for an SNP landslide to produce this kind of result? Well, it's probably aspirational, I think, is the answer to that. These are the things you would want to see, and I dare say that the SNP, if it does get a landslide, will fight tooth and nail to try and make these things happen in Westminster, even if they don't succeed. But it's still a bit disingenuous to promise things like that when you know really that you're not going to be able to produce them. That is what I would call like Trumpism. Trump bases all of his decisions on promising people what they want and then trying to get it knowing he's not going to, and then saying, well, it's not my fault. Another person said we couldn't do it. This is not the way we want Scottish politics run. And that brings me, talking of Scottish politics for some reason has brought me to football. Scottish politics on its own is always seen as a kind of niche market, if you like. In Scotland, as somebody pointed out recently on the internet, this is not, by the way, a British person pointing this out, but generally an observation made by a sociologist I saw online recently was that colonial nations like Scotland, which are part of some larger state, which don't have control over things like football, for example, they have a much smaller demographic, a smaller population. Their league structure, in the case of the Scottish Premier League, is tiny by comparison with that of its near neighbour England. And because it's small and it's viewed as niche, it attracts less money, and therefore less talented players tend to want to play in that league. And the talent pool is smaller because there's fewer people and there's less money. So any talented football players that there are fewer and further between. And because the league is smaller, there's not so much competition, so the choice of players is less, and yada yada. But the upshot of this was that this sociologist was pointing out that colonized states cannot win international football tournaments simply because they don't have the resources to develop the skills and the talent that they may have enough in order to put together a really competitive team. Some of the team members may be really good, some of them will be okay, and some of them will maybe not quite be up to par, but they're not going to be able to field the kind of consistently athletic, high-level football playing athletes that we see from bigger countries such as Germany and England and other places, I guess, in the south of America and Spain. So we just don't have that ability. And so all the time that we talk about people who are 90-minute nationalists or 90-minute Scots, those who wave the saltire and support Scotland at football games, then they're never really going to win anything as long as we remain a colony. And as a friend of mine was also pointing out on social media recently, if you really want Scotland to do well at an international level, Scotland needs to be independent, and it needs to be able to attract the funding to its game, the advertising revenue, have control over the television rights so that the TV rights are here and not done by an English company or a foreign company, so that we can actually allow our Scottish game to flourish and to develop the kind of talent we need, the right facilities, attracting the highest level players, bringing them on, training them on, and so on. All of that we can't do while we're attached to the United Kingdom, or rather, should I say, trapped within the United Kingdom. So I think in the round, I'm in a frame of mind where I'm pretty worried because my vision of Farage and Trump running America and the UK doesn't make me feel safe in the global context, because I am really worried about the kind of stupid decisions that either one of these two men might make. Neither of them, incidentally, has any credentials or credibility in terms of international negotiating, treaties, or anything like that. Okay, yes, they have a civil service. They have a foreign office or a foreign affairs departments who do that kind of stuff. The problem is too much power is vested in the president in the United States, and too many idiots in England are prepared to listen to the kind of rubbish which Farage comes out with and vote for it, inevitably causing the downfall of the entire country, which is what Brexit has provided. Now, goodness knows what other idiotic ideas Farage might have, but one of the key things that I see in both Trump and Farage is the the monstering, the actual demonization of anybody who dares to migrate into either the UK or the United States. Now you have to think about this in the global context. Where are all these refugees coming from? Why are they coming here? Well, they're coming from war-torn countries where we've been fighting proxy wars or funding and arming various factions in proxy wars. And those places become so uninhabitable and dangerous for those poor migrants, then they have to migrate somewhere safer. Where safer than the United Kingdom, with its wonderful, if unearned reputation for being a tolerant nation. By the time they get to the channel in the rubber dinghies, they begin to realise they made a bit of an error, because the United Kingdom is not friendly to them. It doesn't welcome and tolerate people coming in. And in fact, if you think about it, the United Kingdom, if you look at it from an English point of view, is already vastly overcrowded. There are too many people living in England. There are something like more than 62 million people living in England. I can't remember what the figure is for Scotland. The last time I looked, it was 5.5 million. There's about 2.5 million people in Wales, and I don't know how many there are in Northern Ireland at the moment. But either way, England's population dwarfs that of the rest of the UK. Scotland's landmass, incidentally, is about 2/3 the size of England's, and yet it has less than 1/10 of the population. Scotland could take more immigrants, but I don't think England can. And this is why people like Farage and people like Trump are winning votes, because the people in particularly England are terrified of too many immigrants coming in to a country which hasn't spent any money on its social infrastructure at all, and therefore it can't take even the number of people it has at the moment. You only have to look at the sewage problem in London to realise that's the case. And we're now being told that the new sewage system in London is something which will benefit Scotland in some tangential, weird, unconnected way. And so we're now being requested to pay for part of this new sewage system in London, even though it has absolutely no benefit to us whatsoever, and yet we're paying for it. So I guess my point today is that things in the UK look pretty garbage. I mean, the near-term future for the UK, even if Farage doesn't get in the next general election after this one, we're going to be faced with whatever Keir Starmer managed to stumble and bumble his way through for the next 5 years, and goodness knows what state the United Kingdom economy will end up in after that. We saw what happened with Gordon Brown, remember? So staying attached to the UK makes no sense whatsoever. The ship is sinking, and Scotland has a lifeboat. It has a lifeboat called vast natural resources, with which we could do business all over the world, including Europe. And yet we're sitting here going, well, we better know, because England's really helping us here. No, they're not. England is siphoning off everything that we own for their own benefit and firing all the profits from that to shareholders, not to the people who own the resources, i.e. you and me. Because all of Scotland's natural resources are never part of the Union Treaty. They're not included in it. There's no clause which says that England has any right to annex those resources, or to exploit them and profit from them, or to pass those profits on to third parties. That's not in the treaty. If you want to stop that exploitation, and you want your football team to do a lot better, vote for independence. But we're not going to get it at this general election. It's going to have to wait until 2026. And at that point, something big is going to have to happen. I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.